Oh, right. Oh,
Ding, ding. At least I knew when people were hitting us.
Nice. What's this one for?
Audio.
Gotcha, only.
And also so we can see the feed. So
Fabulous.
we'll see what's
And you don't want to lift
going
it.
up.
You don't need
No, I want it out of the
Oh,
shot.
Oh, nice. That's actually out of the shot.
So, man,
What up, what up?
we actually got some for real shit going on here,
This-
right?
All right, stand by. Here we go. I think we're
Okay.
just about live.
Whose
And
notation was that? Yours?
yeah. With,
What was that sound?
oh, that must have been my phone.
Ah.
So far away, at least. Hey, everybody. Welcome back here at MetaJAX Central. We're ready for our second roundtable of the MetaJAX JazzFest. And once again, moderating round two, where we're going to dive deeper into the metadata of the future for music in the protocol called Ragtag. David Thompson, take it away.
All right. Thanks so much, Tim. And thanks for your work in supporting the arts and supporting jazz. This is really a very unique venue. I think it's really a public service, and I know it's a passion of yours and a labor of love. And so I just want to thank you for holding this space, creating this space, and providing such a venue for the artists.
Well, we do it because we love it. I think you know that.
Yeah, totally.
So it's so great to have you guys here.
Likewise.
Okay. Well,
And
yeah.
who do we have with us?
Yes. So this is, I'm going to let Manny Moreno introduce himself. He's very difficult to introduce in, in any,
Do your best.
any sort of small way. But I'll start by saying I've known Manny for probably 6 or 7 years now. And we worked together at Disney when we essentially were working on a quality control supply chain for the Disney Plus launch. And as a part of that, one of the big areas that we focused on was rights management and rights clearances and the quality control process. And so we're in the trenches there in a big project like that, and really got to know one another. And when this Ragtag project came up, not only were we both technical and all that, but Manny is a very rare in the sense of not just being a programmer and an architect and developer, but a multi-instrumentalist, and he's also got his own record label. He's a producer. So in terms of an effort like this, it's just a real honor to have Manny involved. And not only that, he's studied jazz, and so we connected around that, and that was like his big introduction into music. So we have a pretty awesome core team here. But yeah, Manny, why don't you introduce yourself in your own words? Maybe how did I do it?
Oh, sure. No, humility, you make it hard, But no, David's absolutely right. We built a relationship foundationally through the shared, work with Disney. But as we got to know each other and became friends, I pulled back the curtain and showed him this other beast that is a musician that lives inside of me. And so, one of the things that I really enjoy, and part of the reason that I'm excited about this project, is because it allows me to really unify two areas of my brain that really flex my creative muscles, and ultimately I think will benefit everyone. What we're working on is somewhat innovative, and I'm glad to be sitting next to these two gentlemen. And again, also beautiful venue, and I'm looking forward to hearing some tunes.
Right on. It's going to happen.
Yeah, so in the spirit of improvisational jazz, I think we'll have a pretty just open conversation about what we're thinking with Ragtag, an extension of a lot of the conversations we've been having over really the 6 months or so here, and really just have this conversation be an invitation for anybody that likes this type of subject matter, that wants to contribute, wants to be a part of this effort. We're very, very early on, very embryonic. We have a white paper, which is in, I think it's in the link to the website, to the presentation, but you can go to djt.eco/ragtag, and you can at least quickly scan and see any info about that, or read it in detail later. But the foundation of it is a basically a white paper. We started like a lot of Web3 projects do with a white paper, just getting our ideas out there. And I'll just summarize the overall high-level concept and the idea behind this. And a lot of this comes from what has been going on, an observation of what's been going on in the Web3 space, particularly around NFTs, which people really, really want. I think people really want NFTs to be something that they aren't quite yet. I think everyone sees a tremendous possibility and opportunity for them to be a way to transform the nature of the relationship between creators and the monetary dynamic and the relationship between creators and their fans and their community, really, where they've been disintermediated by big distribution platforms and been really diluted, I would say, is a good way of putting it, financially, where 25 million streams correlates to about $1,000, and there's really no transparency regarding how these algorithms are getting artists visibility and what have you. On the other hand, we have NFTs, which, again, I think they're awesome. But one thing that's really been missing, and I think has held everything back with respect to NFTs, is that there's not a framework really core to the whole technology of NFTs itself around rights. And so rights, as we know, as a framework, human rights people often hear of, but intellectual property rights, physical property rights, the word rights, I think, is an important framework to consider. Often rights are needed as a framework when there are injustices, inequities, and things of that nature. Everybody wants to, I think, be totally free and have this idea that we shouldn't need to try to define freedom, because in some ways, the more you try to define it, the less you end up having in a certain way. So nonetheless, as rights are not proactively expressed, well, we need a way of proactively expressing rights so that people are not taken advantage. So that's really what Ragtag is about. What do we mean in the context of music? Well, at a very high level, ownership itself, which is related to property, often can be thought of as a bundle of rights, a series of rights related to any particular category of asset. So if someone were to say they own a house, that means that you can basically do certain things within and around and to that house. You can enter it, you can exit without needing to ask anyone for permission. You can paint it, but not if you're part of a homeowners association. Maybe you might need to get special permission. Generally speaking, you don't have a right to burn your house, even though you own it. Now, extending that to paintings, people, when they say they own a painting, what does that mean? It means that they have the right to exhibit it, they have a right to store it, they have a right to transport it, they have a right to sell it, auction it. However, not a lot of people know this, but you do not have a right, when you own a painting, to reproduce the image of that painting. Just because you own it does not mean you can take a copy of that image and put it onto a beach towel or a coffee mug. Nonetheless, it certainly happens. And so we've seen this in the case of NFTs, where there are a lot of people that were saying, okay, let's all get together, let's create a DAO, and let's acquire an NFT of like a rare book or a constitution or whatever, and then say like, okay, well, we own the NFT of the book, let's go make a movie out of the book. And people are like, well, no, you have an NFT of one copy of the book. That doesn't give you a right to make a movie out of that book. So the lack of a framework of rights, I think, has been an impediment, because people don't know what they've gotten, what they haven't gotten. So shifting that conversation to music, then the question is, first of all, who owns music anymore? We used to kind of have the feeling that we own music. We'd have a record collection and then a CD collection. And then as we went to MP3s, we saw the idea of ownership, kind of still there, but kind of eroding. And then when that went online into streaming, I think it started to become even more diluted in terms of what that means. You could have a big catalog, or you could have invested a lot in certain playlists or this or that. And more your identity and or all the effort that you put into a particular account there aren't clear rights associated with that, and there isn't just a clear feeling that people, even if they do pay a lot, are not able to necessarily acquire just that feeling of owning music and being a participant in it. So that's really what Ragtag is all about, is providing a framework for assets, digital assets. And then the question of how can we then apply that to music so that ownership, as we think of it, can be resiliently expressed as a series of rights. And in today's world, those rights, there are a series of rights related to usage and of music. For example, when we talk about music licensing, which is a type of ownership of which, you know, royalties and participation in those rights become in effect. When we talk about that, we have lots of different categories of rights related to music licensing, which has to do with essentially an implication that you have certain degrees of ownership of a particular music catalog. So what does that mean? That means you might, those familiar with the music industry would recognize terms of licensing classes like master, blanket, performance, publishing, sampling, streaming, interactive, non-interactive, mechanical, and synchronization. I think that's the majority of it. And so, for example, synchronization rights means that if I acquire the synchronization rights, that degree or that type of ownership of the song asset, that means I have a right to feature a song in some sort of other medium, like a movie or a TV commercial or a video game or a metaverse or what have you. So it's a synchronization right. And so what we are really trying to do here is have a standard format, a standard way of expressing in digital form what it is like to describe ownership of music. So here we have, you can see here we have a 50 or so page document where we go and we attempt to define canonically so that it could be embedded in a cryptographic form in a resilient way, in a standard way, but also a resilient way, what these ownership rights happen to be. So again, it's pretty long, but when we look at the different types of performance rights and sync licenses, mechanical licenses, digital downloads, the idea is that if we don't express this, if we don't provide clarity around what people can and can't do, well, that's going to create uncertainty. It's going to create future opportunity for conflict and contentiousness and lots of lawyers to get involved. Well, if we don't have a standard framework around rights, what can that be? How can we prevent all of that? So that's really a high-level overview.
Is there a place where people can follow along on the document that right now? Do we have that up yet?
Yeah,
public?
Right now it's this is the site. I think it's we're beaming live from Beam, beem.xyz, app.beam.xyz. And and then there's a link here, I believe here. Otherwise, you can just go to djat.eco/ragtag, and we have both the white paper and then we have a overall overview of what that looks like.
And I'm going to put some links on all the chats right now.
Okay, cool.
Let me jump in real quick,
Yeah.
Just to kind of, while you were speaking, there were a lot of things going through my head,
totally.
and just this is not a shameless plug, honestly, but my record label is called Digital Crossroads Music, and there's a reason behind that name, and it's because I'm dating myself a little bit here, but I was a teenager in the time there wasn't any internet, right? But now we have gone through this amazing digital age that first started with just kind of like the internet that's grown into this social media, and now even AI and blockchain. And so I feel like we're at this amazing intersection of all these technologies and how we as musicians and creatives can actually leverage all of that all together without our brain exploding as well, right? Because musicians have a lot of things to worry about, right? They have to worry, right now some are worried about AI. They have to worry about creating enough content, promoting themselves, an independent,
managing all these different accounts.
Exactly.
As if they didn't suffer of anxiety
right.
already. Now they have a new layer.
Yes.
They need to learn how to code.
Yeah.
They need to learn about all these tools. It's overwhelming.
So, and by the way,
Absolutely.
we had a switch for Tim here. You know, big bit of an upgrade, but no, just kidding.
Serious upgrade.
No, this is Natalia. Natalia was with us yesterday. For those who remember, she's. Well, you introduce yourself really quickly.
So I have a background in corporate law, international tax, a lot of change management. I think I've worked in multiple countries where they've been in the process of transitioning from being basically, for example, either startup or family-owned business and taking it all the way to where they're an established, like just global corporation. And so I think that as part of that, I discovered that automation is something I'm really passionate about because frankly, I just felt so overwhelmed with all the work that I had to do. And I think that's why I turned to automation and I learned how to do it myself because it was the only way I could keep up. And because of my focus on international tax and specifically in the entertainment industry, realized that creatives generally don't get to keep most of their profits because I was seeing the tax returns, right? Of all the main creative talent. And I'm like, wait, what? That's how much money you make?
Yeah.
Okay, like that's.
And there's also, we were talking at one point also where there is also kind of a rich get richer even with the realm of artists where, for example, collecting royalties, a lot of like really more artist enterprises, the really big name artists that have, you know, hundreds of millions of you know, sales and whatnot, they collect all their royalties through special purpose vehicles in like, you know, the Netherlands or whatever, where they're lower tax brackets for collecting royalties.
The opaqueness, like the statement that you get, like, because I've seen the BMI statements and it's like, I mean, first of all, like pennies on the dollar. And then second of all, like, how do you even know that that's how much was collected in each country? And then like, what can you do? If, like, what are you going to go travel to the country and where do you even start and how do you even like?
Yeah, I had a friend or you know that I worked with a while back, and one of the things that he did is set up a bit of an arbitrage kind of operation with artists where he would basically buy the rights, the collection rights of a lot of their royalties, and they would get a stack of papers like seriously like this high per quarter, regarding like all the different territory avails and all the different types of categories of licensing. And he would basically say to them, because they can't go after them, he's a lawyer, and so he could pay a lawyer anyway. And they have no recourse. They couldn't understand these stack of papers. And so what he would say is like, anything I collect above what you're currently collecting, I'll just take a percentage of that. So it's kind of like but that's a very bespoke, you know, thing. But even still, like the point is that this massive degree of uncertainty, you shouldn't have to go chase this stuff. This should just be the default. It should just be very clear. It should be very available. It should be very accessible. And there shouldn't be this game of obfuscation and things of that nature.
But I think the reason that the obfuscation or like opaqueness exists is because I think about it like similarly to like, say, like remote work. There are a bunch of systems now, like Deloitte has great like technologies where you can track people, but it's only as good as like the output is only as good as the input.
Yeah.
And the problem, for example, when you make a song today, is that how do you track all of the inputs today? Right.
Yeah. Well, I actually kind of wanted to bring that up. You know, Dave, you gave a great like kind of high level, you know, overview of what we're trying to talk about, but one thing I do want to share, you know, with the masses about what we're doing is some of the progress we've made as well at a very, you know, fundamental level. Part of my role in this project is a lot of the architecture and the systems that are all talking to each other. And so just starting at the top, you know, we have 5 different types of open source projects that are related to blockchain and automation in many different ways. And so that's just to bring up that the ideal fundamental starting place for a ragtag asset. For a musician, you would start with like an album. And then underneath that album, you've got songs. But that's kind of where normally everybody stops, right? Now, there's a lot of sampling that's going on, and then you also have AI that's generating things. And so what really is another benefit and value of Ragtag is that we're going to go down even deeper to the level of the actual stems of each track. And we'll be able to standardize this protocol in such a way that even in your DAW, your digital audio workstation, you'd be able to, insert your Ragtag ID, and all the metadata, the history, anything you've done with that song would be with you from the beginning. Because, copyright law, when you create something, you have that copyright, but if you have to go to court, you've got to register it, you've got to go through that process. But technically, once I make it, it's mine. And so that's where we kind of get a step in the door ahead of everyone else with Ragtag, because now we're kind of materializing that concept of I create it and I own it the minute I do. Now that's actually the truth when you actually, mint your asset on the Ragtag protocol. So just kind of wanted to bring that and share where we're at with that.
That's awesome. So I love that you got right into AI. And so I want to mention we talked about it a little bit yesterday, but one of the rights that is, I would say, foundational to everything related to the arts and just this overall subject is that of droit de suite. And I mentioned it yesterday, which means the right to follow. And so here's the Wikipedia for it.
I'm going to attempt to back.
Yeah. And for people that are familiar with second sale royalties, or in the case, which has been another hot topic in the case of NFTs, right? With like a lot of the marketplaces kind of abandoning second sale royalties. But this right, the droit, that's the French word for right, is droit de suite, is the right to follow. And it's a foundational right, so that if you don't have this right to follow and to participate in and understand the ways in which any subsequent change to your rights are happening, well, then you're just going to end up losing your rights. So not only will you not be able to follow your right to a second sale, every subsequent right related to any control over derivative works or anything of the sort, you're gonna lose them. So I would really say that this right, the right to follow, is really the critical underpinning and foundational right related to the whole Ragtag system. Even though we're, on top of that, we're really talking more about other secondary rights. But this is more of the philosophical, theoretical foundation to it. So when we talk about AI,
but actually, if I may, before you jump off that topic, because I think that's really interesting, because I went to law school in Colombia, and the Colombian civil law system is based on partly the French system. And so I think that part of the reason why intellectual property rights work differently than they do in the US is partly based on this specific right. And I think that is linked to a concept of derechos morales, which what it means is like the moral right to something, right? And that is not something you can even alienate, because if you as a creator of an artwork piece, for example, or a song, like nobody should ever be able to take away your title as a creator, so that it is recognized in perpetuity that was your idea, right? And that follows you.
Certainly. Okay, beautiful. And even, even people creating, without consent, using even the name or the likeness of an image that they found somewhere, and just fraudulently minting something or creating a derivative of something without permission, but even without notification, and so I just think it's an interesting underlying framework that's something we'll kind of keep coming back to. And so with respect to AI, I want to say that I believe is first and foremost the first violation of rights that have happened with AI and these LLMs. And Manny can talk as well a lot about the architecture of modern day AIs in particular, of all different types. But these general categories of these large language models are basically violating the right to follow. So we all know collectively, we know that these are being trained on, billions and trillions of images. And it is very true that when a new work is created, it's entirely impossible for anybody to be able to know, exactly what the origin of a particular work was, unless, people are saying in the likeness of Van Gogh or in the likeness of U2 or whatever, the example would be. And I think those are pretty obvious, instances like we've seen with the AI, generated Weekend and Drake cover. I think those are pretty clear cut. But even in those instances where we're not talking about, we know that all of a sudden we've gotten to a situation almost practically overnight where the entire history of all of almost the Akashic record of human ingenuity and creativity has now been commandeered by these very powerful platforms and these very powerful distribution platforms and tech companies to basically be able to generate, whole new compositions that, are in a lot of cases really awesome, but without being able to understand, provide any attribution, provide any compensation, and without providing any ability for some people to go in. We've seen a few lawsuits. Maybe you can speak about that if you followed those lawsuits where people are trying to basically say, no, I want my copyright or whatever to be withdrawn from any training data sets or whatever. Have you been following those cases?
Yeah, it's actually, and it's interesting, right? Because I think because the common law system does not have like this aspect, this component that you're talking about, I feel like it's really confusing to people, and there's no clear answer because, for example, with AI, you have an algorithm that's like driving the output, right? And that algorithm can be something really simple or it can be something really complex. And the concept of like human authorship, like how is that defined today? And how you think about, for example, their input towards that defined the architecture of the complexity of that algorithm. To me personally, that is an element of human authorship that should be protected versus like, oh, is it like this simple generative like algorithm that you just like click a button? Well, that maybe doesn't have like an element of human authorship that is significant enough to get protected. And it's a spectrum, right? And so it's really challenging because how do you draw the line in the spectrum and
100%.
say like over 50% is going to be human
50,
authorship,
right,
and 150, and right?
I actually OpenAI, who created ChatGPT 4, they proposed a pretty interesting battle because they're being sued right now by a bunch of book publishers, right? And so I get it, they're saying, it's plagiarizing our work. But it's interesting how OpenAI has come back. And if you think about it, they are claiming fair use because it's not really copying the exact, material that the person created. It's more, influenced and sometimes in the public domain, right? And so really it's kind of a balance. Who's got the more heavy scale? Is it the AI
lawyers,
right? Is it the AR and the fair use, or is it the book publishers?
But I feel like that's part of the problem is this view of like it either has to be black or white. What I like about, say, for example, Ragtag is that if you track all of the contributions to that collaborative effort that resulted in a creation, and you attribute that ownership that way from the beginning, then you're not stuck in this problem of it has to be white or black.
Love it.
Right?
And I think that's so. So yeah, let's double click specifically on that. So in the beginning, we're going through this process. It's really kind of a lean startup, lean product development process where we're doing some prototyping. The list of technologies we've been prototyping with today are up here: Polygon, DefraDB, really powerful decentralized infrastructure database, Third Web, a cachelet, and Covalence, which we spoke about yesterday. These are the core tech that we're prototyping with. And when you're doing this, you do a little bit of prototyping. I suggest in the best practices, and then you go demo it to people and you say, do you like what we're doing? You get out of the building, as they say, and you talk to people and you say, do you love this? Do you hate this? So we talked to one of the largest catalogs around what we're doing, and they were like, well, you know, it's cool. We love in general what you're doing, but we're not really so excited about streamlining things because it's kind of our business model is to like do things in a really bespoke way and try to get leverage. He was like, however, if you are talking about this copyright issue, that is existential. That is keeping all of us up late at night. And what did he mean by that? Well, he meant by that specifically with some of these issues with the Copyright Office recently saying that these new compositions are not eligible for copyright. Well, at that point, there's no intellectual property. Okay, so what that means is now everybody is basically aligned, okay, around this idea that we need some way to show, even if we're not giving credit for all the nicking of people's intellectual property to create these new generative compositions. Okay, if you take that out of the equation, we're still now stuck with the issue that we're not able to create new intellectual property using these tools.
Exactly.
Okay, and now unless we can prove a certain degree of human contribution or human ingenuity that went into it. Now, where does that come from? And that's where I think that this collaboration with Campus JAX and with the MetaJAX label that they set up, that Tim has set up, is a really exciting lab for us to really explore this issue. Well, why is that? And I'm gonna get Tim back in here to talk a little bit about this.
I'm throwing a few invites
Okay.
and
Nice.
some tags to the document out here.
Have I told you I love this guy?
So what is this? Okay, so we'll bring him in a second. So what does this mean? Well, so jazz, the history of jazz being, you know, people say one of the only like original American music form, right? Whether that's totally true or not, we're going to go with it. And so the history of jazz is really, first of all about collaboration and attribution and sampling and entrepreneurship, but also really like standing on the shoulders of giants and understanding that and like redoing songs and riffing and bringing in elements of another song that everybody like could just see that, oh, somebody's clearly going there and is like sampling so-and-so mid improv, right? And then other people riff off that. So this is a very well established part of the art form, and it's all about the history and the lineage and the provenance.
And the creativity, the creativity sits, I think, in the middle of everything, because really the reason why I mentioned entrepreneurship is like jazz, I think like hip hop is defined by people wanting to think different, to like for wanting to go against what's established. And I think that is the pure essence of creativity. And so it's a really like beautiful place to go and analyze how people even do it, because then you can like really determine how to track it, each contribution, and then how you value it from like the objective side of things, which you can get benchmarks for, either that are coming from within, where you can just ask people in a private way how much money they make and get a blended rate, and then you can confirm that against third parties that provide benchmarks, for example. And that's one aspect of it. But then there's the perceived value aspect of it, right? And then the perceived value is, what was your experience like while you were contributing to the ecosystem, right? And there's like that, for example, because we, for example, in our jam sessions are contributing together, but maybe I feel like this was so formative to me that it gave me so many ideas in my business that my perceived value of what's happening here is way higher than the hourly wage that is blended and that is determined in the system, right? And I feel like that's the experimental part of it, is how do you like create different data points that inform what value is, taking into account all of these different elements.
Yeah, Absolutely. And that's exactly right. And what we're doing on a technical level to facilitate exactly those types of analyses is we're really opening up this design space around kind of like, Web3 protocols like proof of this, proof of presence, proof of this, proof of that, proof of work, proof of stake. So we almost have like a proof of humanity or proof of human originality or proof of originality or proof of something of that nature, whereby instead of just treating these assets as individual, just itemized static assets, we think of them much more in the arc of their history of the provenance of their progression in space over time, and their ways in which they get reconstituted and things of that nature. And so as a part of the Ragtag protocol, we're really going to, right now, I would say our current plan, although it's always subject to change, is we're really going to dive really, really deep into this idea around what the category of licensing I would say would be the sampling licensing. I don't know too much relative to maybe some others about that entire history of sampling licensing, but I think it was originally invented, or one of the reasons was around DJs, because they started sampling and they're, giving like, $100 million, concerts, and they're using all other types of
And hip hop, I think.
hip hop,
They were
yeah.
blending,
Did you forget the Two Live Crew back in the 90s, Brian?
So as a part of that, this notion of sampling, right? Well, as far as I understand, it was never really all that well instituted or tracked. It wasn't very easy to do, right? And so it definitely does get, I would say, enforced, but again, in more of a punitive way, and not in a. It's just not the right way to kind of go about it. So rather, what we're really thinking through is, how do we take a STEM first, a STEM-centric, STEM-based approach to sampling, where we track the individual stems and we enhance the context of that sampling license. And this is where it's really starts to diverge, I think, from where most of music licensing has happened to date. And we extend beyond just the stem as an individual kind of itemized asset, and we extend that into the actual process that goes on in and around that derivative work with either an original or a derivative. So what do I mean by that? Well, why don't we track, out of a particular stem? And I think one of the cool things is we're going to get the stems from all the live recordings of the crypto or the Campus Jacks
This weekend's
performances, right? We're going to have these stems. We're going to be able to experiment with them and give them a Ragtag ID, but then also extend and enhance, create a much broader context around that stem of all of everyone who performed around that. What are the accompanying instruments? Things like tempo, pitch, things like any software that goes into either any algorithms that go into either processing that music, right, as it comes off the instrument. What is the algorithmic pipeline, and then subsequently any post-production, so that if we then go and make those stems available, the original artist would have a right to track, if it does get reconstituted into a new composition, the entire pipeline and the techniques and the tools that were used to create that derivative work, including the people that were involved in that, would be embedded in the actual Ragtag ID.
Yeah, because the two, I think, problems to be solved that we're experimenting with are, what is the smallest unit of measurement that can be tracked? I think that's where we depart from where the music business has been. And we've seen these kind of disruptions in other technologies. You take it from when NASDAQ came along and was able to break down trading stocks into milliseconds. And then the New York Stock Exchange had to kind of catch up to that to do likewise, right? It gets, the smaller a unit of measurement gets, that's what technology does, then the more you can do, right?
quantum
Yeah.
physics, for
The
example,
more
I think goes
possibilities
right into
exist.
that. Yeah.
And so, whereas we
Right.
look at a song and we wonder, wow, this song kind of feels a lot like that song. That's a huge, measurement space,
Right.
a song. But it's been where we've been. The business has been at song blocks forever.
Right.
Right.
Now, I think because of technology, we can shrink the unit of measure down, the block size of what we're measuring, and it could be at kind of a thematic level. It could be, say, a musical phrase. It could be just a sound. There's a variety of ways this could happen, right? We're just going to experiment right now with just stems. That which becomes, when combined together, musical parts make a performance. And this, again, we're just experimenting here. But the first problem to really look at, how can we make smaller units of measure, right? Then the second problem that we will be solving, and we know it's possible because forms of this exist, is how can we track and trace that unit of measure, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
So we have right now, for example, we want to be able to track sound in the air, terrestrial, that like Shazam. Shazam right now is able to hear a song from a master recording and go, oh, that's song XYZ. And of course, it tends to point you toward Apple Music to go find it, right? Oh, we buy it now. There we go. That was the song. So the extension on that technology, or the advancement on that technology, is now let's make it so that a melody in the air can be identified.
Yeah.
A sound, a tone, a texture can be identified, right?
Yeah.
The second flip side of that is, let's be able to not only go out into the air and find that sound or that piece, let's also go out into the cyber space, right?
Yeah.
As what is currently happening on YouTube. And here's what I think is a great example of what can happen and why I think it can extend into the terrestrial. Because YouTube right now is able to, when we have live performances on our stage, the YouTube algorithms are able to figure out the song. That didn't happen 3 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But now, because it used to be just similar to Shazam, the master recordings could match wavelengths and go, oh yeah, that's this song, that's this recording, the ISRC number, it could figure all that out. Well, now it's able to actually go, oh wait, somebody's singing this melody from a Frank Sinatra tune back whenever, right? As performed by So that's huge, because if we're able to do that at a more granular level, a smaller building block, that really opens up opportunities for musicians. And it also means that, what do we do?
For so many people.
When you have an idea that's similar to my musical idea, and you're on the other side of the world. Well, if we're able to timestamp the original, the points of origin, right? Then that means that we can kind of know, wow, yeah, same idea happened here first, happened there first. Or maybe there's an acknowledgement and an understanding that you had that idea over in that part of the world. I had this idea on this part of the world. We're going to share that idea.
Yeah, and that's exactly what happened recently with it's been happening a lot recently with Ed Sheeran, right? And his copyright lawsuit, and there've been a number of these, right, where he went through years of this, where I think it was like let's get along, or that forget the song they were claiming he was copyrighted on. He even like played along with it on one time on stage. Let's Get It On, I think it was. Anyway. Marvin Gaye, yeah, I think it was that one. And at some point he was like, because this has to do with just originality, right? And basically artists take it really, really seriously if they are considered, creative, unique, original people with integrity, that you kind of sat there and copied somebody else's work. It's a horrible thing to level at somebody that, especially, that's their whole, foundation of their whole enterprise or identity. And so at some point he said, well, why did you really go through this? Wouldn't you just have to just pay the fee and go on and just like, he was like, no, he was like, because actually this was totally existential for me. If I had to literally think as I was just strumming along and think of all the different possible melodies or harmonies that I would have like somehow accidentally stumbled upon that might have, I might have actually heard a song 10 years ago and it was stuck in my head without even remembering the origin, almost like the LLM of his brain or whatever. And a bunch of people were sending me this recently. And I definitely recommend watching this because it's really fascinating. A group of folks, this guy and a group of other folks, I think a couple of them, basically went and mapped out every single possible melody. And, because like do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, right? And if you look at Manny and I do a lot of stuff with tech and passwords, right? And you can brute force a password if it's not enough, characters or whatever. And so basically they took that approach, just brute forcing melodies, and they found out every single possible melody that could ever be performed. And one of the things that they learned about that is it's not too hard to stumble across and stumble upon other melodies,
which is so powerful. So if we think of it in terms of being able to measure melodies, sounds, phrases in smaller units, and we're able to track and trace that, then suddenly derivative material is encouraged.
Right.
That's right.
It's like musicians all over.
That's
okay,
right.
not a problem to be leveraging
It's an honor.
or
It's
using.
like an honor. Yeah, it's like,
I'm going to use your idea.
They're wanting
I'm going
to
to
find
create
the
over
license.
here. It comes to life,
Yes,
and everybody
exactly.
wins.
Yeah.
The creator who's building on the other creator, both creators win.
Yeah, and now that's the other super X factor in all this, which I would say is still very TBD. But one of the things we're really working on in terms of once we have all these substrates in place, what we can start to do is experiment with new tranches of essentially second derivative royalties, just like the way if you have a patent, right, which is a whole other rant. But in some ways, we're talking about a similar type of thing, right? It's a very, very similar thing. It's like how original, how much did one new composition, what are the exact deltas and the areas of deltas, and how truly original it is. But
A patent just basically has more of a process or mechanical element to it. I think is the way to think about it. But ultimately, it all goes down to those inputs in that smallest,
yes,
basically block,
right, and
so that you can run through the whole chain, even with the patent.
And
right?
this idea, though, that also you have to kind of show a degree of originality. But what if we got rid of this idea of truly perfectly original? Okay, to riff off of that. And what if we were to say, nothing is truly original. We're always creating derivative works. And what if we just systematize that and canonize that into a prior art license that's intrinsic and a part of every composition, that would require that each composition must generate derivative royalties to everything that they have built upon that's coming forward. That could be done somewhat algorithmically and somewhat voluntarily, right?
And what if that iteration was able to be tracked, traced, monetized, and paid out without any mediation?
Yeah, exactly.
What if there was a tool? What if there were tools that were able to actually accomplish this without the middlemen?
Right.
That's the goal.
And no offense
We won't
to
mention them. But you know what? Let me bring something up real quick. Going back to master recordings, I love that the four of us here, have very different backgrounds and perspectives. And I brought this up on a previous jam. And I kind of want to ask the question also, so that bring out the thoughts in you guys. But we also got to consider, there's two levels of musicians, right? We have the great Arturo Sandoval, who's part of the MetaJAX stable there. And he's got a whole, history of recordings and licensing and things. So I would understand someone like him being a lot more protective over his rights and uses and stuff like that. On the other hand, you have myself and some of the other artists I work with that are not, to the level of notoriety that he is. And so for me, it's actually useful to share that music with others and hope that someone makes a derivative work out of it. Going back to what you were saying about it's an honor. And so my question is,
think
how
of it
does,
like this.
Yeah.
So
how
let's
does
say,
Ragtag,
so let's
you know,
say,
fit into
yeah,
that?
totally.
let's say that you've created a beat. Let's just something simple that probably everybody kind of understands. You know, a beat now is understood to be its own thing, right?
Mhm.
And you're just giving it away. Well, maybe it's fine to give it away right now, as long as you know where it's going.
That's the right.
Right.
Because
I
at some
love
point,
that.
if somebody comes along and is able to actually make that your beat meaningful and actually build an audience, that it's something that they've created has some essence of yours.
Yeah.
You know, the missing element is the tooling to be able to really capture that,
Trace it.
track and trace it,
Right.
and also assign value.
That's
right.
That's it.
Because
that's
how much of that final outcome, how much value does your block
Right.
contribute
Right.
to that?
and
That's where the
and-
covalence
yeah,
comes in.
Yeah, exactly. That automated valuation. But to your point before about now YouTube, right, is able to do that. Well, YouTube is able to do that, right? No, like it's a closed proprietary system. It's a proprietary algorithm, and the artist, right? YouTube may know, Google may know that that song was featured in the video, but the artist doesn't. They're not the first person to be notified.
Well, and
They have no right to say, you know what, that's
and it's-
totally fine with me, or I love
and
that.
it's assigning value to that song, and that's where it goes back to the idea. Well, let's be able to track and trace smaller units. In this case,
Right. And
Manny's chunk of music.
and also
Right.
and also do give the artist in some instances I don't think we want to get into an area where too much control of the appreciation extends into the appreciation. I do think it's totally fair and totally appropriate if a musician wants to say to a politician, hey, I don't want you featuring my song in your campaign rally. I mean, that's, I think, pretty obvious. Music is, I think, the only category of intellectual property that has a compulsory licensing framework in the form of mechanical, licensing in the first place. And what does that mean? That means that in the early days, mostly in terrestrial radio, that meant that it streamlined the licensing process by making it mandatory that if you played a song on the radio, you didn't have to ask for permission, but you were supposed to, pay whatever the 1 cent per play or 3 cents or whatever it ends up being.
Same thing if I used your song that you wrote on my record, I would just pay a mechanical royalty license in order to, and I could do that.
But I mean, could you, and this is could you say, no, I don't want you to cover my song and release it on a new album?
Theoretically, no.
Theoretically, no.
Yeah.
Right.
But now where it gets more complicated, where you have more say in use, is when it comes to syncing to video.
Right.
That's where you have
which
Which is more expensive and generates way more revenue
It's a better-
for an artist than a stream.
But
which
it
is
also-
right now
but-
is the best place to get your music used.
But
is
it's also
on a sync license.
but it's also the most complicated negotiating process, number one. And then the other thing that I think is not totally transparent to the musician or the artist is to what degree of additional value are they actually contributing to, right? So if we don't necessarily even know, like on a particular video, right, if a song is in there, are, especially in this day and age, are like products being sold as a part of some sort of stream or whatever.
Well, there's so many different kinds of video applications now. It's not just no longer just a TV show or a commercial, or
but also, like, I don't know that like synchronization on like a movie, right? Would a musician be able to say, yeah, I'll take a certain amount up front, but then I would like to participate in the overall success of the box office?
Anything is possible in that kind of a use.
But the technology to enable that, to streamline that, and to make it also.
So for example, like if you have a song,
Right.
The way I think about it is, you could have like the issue with the sync license is it's not just pairing one thing with the other. And I think depending on your level of involvement and contribution to how they're paired is the other big key element, right? It's like, oh, did I participate in the sound design? Did I contribute to the experience? Again, this like more like, perceived value that people ultimately had that made that be successful and engaging and make all the revenue that it ultimately did. Like, I feel like that's where it's really hard, because currently systems aren't set up to recognize that perceived value, right? It's just meant to be like, oh no, well, you just synced it, and if they get lucky, they get recognized for whatever inputs they had in the sound design, for example.
Yeah, there's going to be more and more conversation
Yeah.
and decisions that are collaboratively made in the creative process. And unfortunately, technology and tools are going to help facilitate that. And they are springing up all around us. Even, we've shared some of those even this last week in our own conversations. And that's just going to help. AI is going to help a lot. Who knows, on the generative side, I know there's a lot of fear, but on the organizational side, it should be our friend for sure.
Yeah, and it could be that we would use it in a way to understand, again, like this delta of how original something is, and just let people understand and know. And then if you were playing on stage, if somebody was sampling or reusing some core elements, first of all, even just without even knowing that, not intentionally so, being able to like match that, and sort of somebody realizing, oh, somebody's using the same elements. And if that was,
and just think of it, our phones and other devices are going to more and more give us opportunities to participate in the ecosystem as validators.
Right.
That's right.
We're out places, and we allow our devices to participate in the air.
Yeah.
Right.
To
me, that's really cool.
That's actually,
for example, like you could leverage AI. Like, say that tonight we're at the Jazz Club and we're listening to the performance for the first time, and say that AI is able to track all this different like beats and stuff, and say that you have an interactive experience with your public where they're tapping every time they just feel like this is incredible. Like, and then now you have an input with respect to the experience, and then you can run some data analytics, and then you can trace it throughout time and see how it performed in different venues and different experiences. For example,
and to me, that's so much cooler than, it was cool 3 years ago to be in a virtual world and with an avatar that's kind of maybe dancing a little bit, but mostly just staring at a screen. You're staring at a screen, and on that screen is another screen where there's a performance. Because we did that multiple times a week, right?
Yeah.
So where we'd have avatars in a virtual world watching on a screen what was happening on our stage live.
Right.
Cool for a minute, but engagement light, right?
Right.
So what you're talking about is like, okay, how do we really participate in what's going on here in the
that's
process?
immersive.
Right. You know what? This is something that I certainly don't want us to overlook, but that's one of the other things that excites me about Ragtag, is because right now what we've really been talking about is licensing and rights like that, but blockchain and the technology, the way it can be leveraged, there's a third person that we haven't really talked about, and that's the fans, right? And so as a musician, I don't make money off of music anymore, and if I want to make any sort of money at all to make it worth it, my job is to build an emotional relationship with my fans and build that community. And that's a lot of hard work, right? But what would make it even more worth it is not only do I have the peace of mind of all of my stuff being protected, but I've also got the opportunity to leverage things like fan tokens, gated events, special
loyalty reward
right, special releases that only a member of your fan community is able to do that. And so really we're talking about the best of both worlds,
right?
And it is, and there are two worlds there, and I think we talked about a little bit yesterday. And I'm very passionate as an advocate for exceptional musicians, many of whom are not influencers. They're not marketers, right? Because there is a whole, this is a great age to be a personality. This is a great time to exist, to be able to get on a camera, get on a phone, talk to people. If you have some cult of personality, you don't really have to have much music skill in order to be a successful music influencer.
Yeah.
Right. And good for those folks. Those aren't the people I'm talking about. That good for them. What I'm talking about are these artists and musicians who are unbelievable, extraordinary, and yet they're kind of camera shy.
Yeah.
They're not. They don't know what to do with any of the social media platforms, and so what we're talking about unleashes their world to be able to actually get into a place where they can be who they are, have the conversations that they can have as what I call music primitives. They speak music as a primary language. They have conversations in music, and there's a whole audience that does appreciate that. Well, this empowers them to be able to participate and let the influencers continue doing what they do. Right? Because many of them are doing just fine.
That's until AI avatars start actually taking over their
Right.
jobs.
Well, you already told me I can't make a film out of my bored apes. So.
Well, I think it's always about I think this day and age, you have the tools that if there's a niche that you're after, like you can capture that niche and build a community around it and monetize it. And so that's one aspect. And I feel like that's always going to continue to exist. And you can be an influencer or a media person or an artist or just audiovisual content. There's a whole slew of categories, right? And this would work for them. But then also where it's the part that I feel like there's a lot of complexity is when you have like this complex composition, which are like the types of songs that you're talking about and the types of artists that make them, right? You have a complex composition, and now it's like, well, if you look at everything that went into that composition, it's so complex to determine what contributed to the end value. Like if that song ended up making, I don't know, millions in the distribution process. Well, why was it? What resonated so much with the audience? Was it the trumpet? Was it the piano? Was it the vocalist? Was it the sound design? Was it the way that they marketed it? Was it like the experience they created because of the brands that they involved and they really understood their audience? And so they captured the essence of the identity that they resonated with.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. The standout features of a successful monetization of a product. A lot of influences go into that, right? But the experience of a great artist or musician having a creative process with other great artists and musicians, and that maybe only a few hundred people appreciate, right? It's not going to have the same outcome as far as monetization, but in aggregate, it can, if it has 200, if you have 200 just amazing fans, I mean, really some of the top, visual artists in the world only need a handful of patrons, right?
Yeah.
Are they the right patrons for you, right?
But I think actually the opportunity is because I feel like that has been the case until now. We have the ability to use the technology, because now you can actually attract more people at a global level to that niche of what you're creating.
Yeah, your people, your tribe,
exactly,
and reaching your tribe that you never knew you had.
Exactly.
Is getting easier and easier, and it's going to be important.
Right.
And you can deploy the experiences different. You can experiment yourself by, for example, performing at different venues or creating experiences within the venues that are part of like the identity that you, for example, connect with. But now you start understanding what is really speaking to this group of people that are following you, right? And then to the extent that you continue to lean into that, well, the more they're going to want to support you, and the more they love you, because really, like at the end and core of, I think, any entertainment industry, including music, is reaching into love,
Yes.
Like that is the key and at the center of
Yeah.
everything.
They-
And so
Yeah, they
Right.
say that as a
It's
part of a lot
emotional.
of, a lot of businesses. They say you want, 100 customers that really love you and gets, before rather than 1,000 that really like you, right? And you really start and try to really develop that type of fan base. And it also comes down to some degree, like quality over quantity. I mean, I think that's a part of it too. But also, I would say the broader theme that I think is going on, which is they say better, faster, cheaper, pick any two. So you can have something that's better and cheaper, but not faster, faster and better, not cheaper. And unfortunately, faster and cheaper has just taken over,
Dominated,
right? Dominated everything. And so the better is what does that mean? Well, better is just how little better can it be in the context of as fast and cheap as it?
Well,
how little better what little good can we get away with, in terms of the quality?
I have so much confidence in what I would call the younger generations, from Gen Z. What comes after that, and what comes after that? We're already seeing it in millennials that the preference for fewer, finer things.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Rather have just one exceptional watch than a whole drawer full of junk watches, right?
Interesting.
Same thing with sneakers. Same thing with, you're seeing it in food. The younger generations are much more foodies than the older generations.
they're seeking experience.
Experience. And same thing with whether craft brews, craft spirits, an understanding of these things, fine wines, anything that requires the development of a palate is on the increase.
And a beautiful story behind it. Really,
Right,
that's the other
with the
thing,
story,
too,
yeah.
which has everything to do with the problem.
And that's-
people want to know, like,
Why should I care?
So my
Yeah,
confidence is that music is going to follow that same trail, that the palette and the understanding of what great, exceptional music is, that's going to be continue to be on the increase and follow the same trail as what we're seeing on the product side of many verticals.
and not to get too existential about it, but I kind of specifically want to know that whatever content that's hitting my eyes or my ears or some combination of the two is not purely generated by AI. Like the idea that I'm allowing, so it's one thing, let's say where you're watching a movie, okay, and you're really occupying somebody else's imaginative state. You're really getting into their headspace and their spirit space, and you're allowing them to occupy you for 2, hopefully not 3 hours. All these movies are so long these days. Okay, that's one thing. But now when AI is doing that, when it's basically you're letting it just take over 2 hours of your life, and I think the same thing about.
But have
about
you seen
sounds.
any of that content? Because let me tell you, I've seen content that is purely created with AI. Like I've been playing with the Runway app a good amount, and then
Gen 2.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And especially once I heard that the movie Everything Everywhere All at Once, like the fascinating thing is generally for that type of movie, and especially because the editing is very intense in that movie, they use a crew of about 100 people is like the statistic. And in this case, they use 7 editors because they leverage Runway as like, that's where you have a good use case of the AI. But that's like that's why they got the nominations that they got. And that's where I feel like you can perceive the human authorship and it's undeniable versus like if you just go on the app and see like.
Well, it's the power of direction, right? Because when you have good direction in any kind of creative art form, right? Great director with a few or with an army, that it's all about what that direction is able to accomplish. An art director similarly.
Yeah. Well, that's an awesome point, but it was also kind of almost proving my point, which is to say, okay, AI is a tool. I'm all for. What I'm kind of getting at more so is like more of the existential level and layer with
all creative. The whole process.
Where I want to know very specifically, like, I often
but look, let's make an important distinction here, okay? As far as the generative nature of AI, right? No matter how good it gets, it's still, and we can get metaphysical about it, is never going to replace the human energy and element or soul, as some people call it. And so if you look at a lot of stuff that's out there right now, you can very easily write it off and say, oh, it's just the beginning, right? But what people should be thinking about more is it's not AI that's going to come after our jobs. It's the people that learn how to use AI that are come after our jobs. And so for us as creators, it's our homework assignment now to figure out how can I take AI and put it into my workflow so I can just make that much better content than
I'm totally cool with that. I mean, if artists, if I'm seeing a work that's composed by an artist, and the artist is saying I used a bunch of these tools and did it in a way they didn't just push a button, you know, and I don't know if it's a question of amount of time that they use, or potentially even being able to track the actual workflow. One of the links that I put down here is that it says artists accuse Adobe of tracking their design process to power its AI.
Well, because it's prompt engineering. And so if you think about that concept, it's just a formula that is leveraging different concepts. So one of the things, for example, that I found fascinating going down the rabbit hole of prompt engineering is it's a new language, essentially. And so that new language has a composition. And if you are able to track without giving credit to someone's experience that has spent years and years of their career specializing in the field to know, for example, what the specific equipment is that they need to produce the experience with whatever they're creating. It could be a photograph, for example. The lens is critical and all those things.
That's right.
And so the ability in making the AI viewed as a tool to create that sort of outcome, it a lot of times goes back to, well, how well do you know the tools that you already have at your disposal to be able to create that output?
Absolutely.
But if you're able, for example, where I have a big problem is with these big corporations now, if they're watching all of our prompting and then they get to just create a database out of that, then that becomes really problematic.
That's precisely the point. So the reason why I put this up on the Ragtag homepage as an example, even though they're talking about Photoshop, I think there's a perfect analogy in there, which is that, first of all, if Adobe takes and were to do that, maybe it's not a bad thing to say hey, we actually observed these 15 super awesome expert users, and they were using our tool in very novel ways, and we're going to create a new tool that's basically automating those specific techniques that those artists were able to innovate, and then give them credit and give them some rev share, of all the revenue of this new tool. And
it's very relevant to the ragtag conversation, because what we're talking about are tools that can find those points of origination. And so that when it does show up in an AI environment, guess what? We know where it came from. Right?
Exactly.
Now, I think we're obviously not there yet. Otherwise, we'd be tracking and tracing all this stuff, like what's this struggle right here. But I think that is where the market is going to demand that happens, that evolves.
Well, also, I think once we get the conversation out there of an alternative and just a different design space, we're well, look, okay, if we can embed the full pipeline of all the techniques, the tools, and then the techniques within those tools, and we provide attribution, just like it's like a technique that then gets sort of a mini micro cryptographically enabled patent that then gets embedded in the asset.
Good stuff, and we're going to get better at appreciation as well. We're going to spot things that we didn't recognize before, just like all of a sudden, when auto-tune, just dominated 20 years ago, we all, it's now that's old now. Same thing with all these tools. I mean, I'll tell you, watching us right now is, in my opinion, one of the best visual generative artists out there today. His name's Bitmarks. He's tuned in from over in Tehran.
Hey, thanks for joining.
And there's a guy who can take things and using generative AI, can do really incredible things that isn't just pushing buttons, and that takes days. This is not like
or longer.
Or
sure. Because I feel like there's also that pressure to the creative process now that is I think we were talking about that as well, where because there's new tools I feel like there's also this thing that is happening to artists where it's like now they feel even like more pressure to
Right.
produce content more quickly, and that takes away from the ability to use the tools correctly.
Yeah, and so
Yeah.
the real artists are going to always rise and just make them amaze us over and over again, because that's what they do.
And you know, I guess maybe one way of stating it too is that there's an opportunity here to create a whole new category of new value for the artists that have to do with the process itself, right?
All
And
the
so-
more reason why
and
we
now
need that granular measurement.
that granular measurement. And so now basically, hey, if I come up with a novel technique, and if I may not even know that I'm the first one to do that, if subsequently so many other people end up using that, number one, the original stems that were a part of it, in the case of the music use case, that were a part of that, they get credit, but then I get credit for coming up with that particular production technique and using the software, and then that becomes a part of the overall, you know, ragtag context.
I'll tell you what, man. I think I said this to you the other day. Again, not to get it existential, but everything we've been talking about for the last hour and our old jams and everything. One thing that I'm just really excited about is I've worked on a lot of different projects and worked with a lot of different people. And it's very rare when you actually feel in your gut that you're doing something innovative.
Mm.
And so I feel like what we're doing here is just the beginning of something innovative that ultimately is going to, allow us to leave our footprint on the moon.
I also hope that, I think also figuring out ways where we can just really honor humans more. I mean, I really do feel that humanity is starting to become in limited supply, and we are a kind of, it feels like we're being encroached upon by all of these, kind of very powerful tools and which should be tools. And of course people, like say Mark Andreessen, right, always saying, well, yeah, there's always anxiety about any sort of new types of these things, and
Technology always.
but that,
creates
it
fear.
always creates more jobs than it ever destroys. And I often say that the original jobs that were displaced with the internet were actually long distance telephone operators, when that's the origin of it. Is like you used to take like 5 minutes to make a long distance telephone call, and then we built the automated switching network of that the internet was built upon. And you no longer have people going in and punching down like that. Okay, we put those folks out of a job. Sometimes I really wish we didn't. I really wish I could get an actual human operator on the phone. I wish that we could actually reintroduce the concept of anytime I want, I could just call an operator and they would know how to, kind of route. I think that would be an amazing new business to like have real humans back in the loop.
And I think it was Seth Godin that said, if you spin back far enough, let's say you go back to like the period of like pre-French Revolution. Well, nobody had a job.
Yeah, that's true too.
There weren't any jobs,
Yeah.
right? People did things,
But
there
what's
were
happening?
vocations.
Yeah, but
So somehow in my head, in my heart, we're going to spin back to something that's going to resemble that a little more. The village.
Mhm.
It's going to be the village where people do amazing things, and where the financial models, in a sense, are collaborative in that sense, and rewarding, and that now I'm not saying it was rewarding back then. I think where we're at in this next version of that is a whole new space, because technology is releasing abundance in this universe.
Yeah, and I think that's I guess one of the points is that the rate at which this is happening though now, and the extremeness with which it's happening, and the pace and just the existentialness is now, I think, different than we've ever seen. I mean, I've been in
different
tech
for sure.
I've been in tech for 30 years, and this is now I'm super anxious about it. And
it's been fun, jam, but
I see you're sweating already.
I'm anxious to jam.
And so and figuring out ways where not just can there be acknowledgement and attribution, like remember the sample, the amen break. You probably know the story of that. The amen break, the most sampled beat ever, and It would be really cool to just, somebody had to go retroactively, and if that was really ragtag, you would get a sense that not only should they not have to feel, if you had created the most sampled drum beat in history, you shouldn't, maybe not you don't have a couple islands and a private jet you bought, but you shouldn't have to be worried about how to, like afford rent the next month, which, you hear these stories, right, where people are making all these big contributions and they don't just not know, they also are not getting compensated. So yeah, I think if we can now have the ability to follow and the right to follow the works and the derivative works and the remixing and remashing between and around all these processes, I think it'll just at least be a fun thing to work on while AI comes for us.
Well, I'm excited about it and working with you guys and the others that are part of this effort, and looking forward to more conversations like this.
Yeah.
Same here.
And we're
Ready to roll.
All right, here we go. Thanks everyone for joining, and I don't know how we end the event here officially.
I think John, you can take us out.
Yeah, and just
There you go.
get in touch if you can connect or figure out some way to find us. But thanks everyone, and I guess get in touch with any of us. That I think I have a connect button on here, or just this is just getting started. We'll
put
reach
links,
out more.
We'll put links and all that stuff later.
There we go.
Okay. All right, thanks everyone.
Thanks, John.
Good.